The Hextall hockey dynasty has two golden pillars, a Hall of Fame grandfather and a revolutionary grandson. But the bridge that connects them is the most tragic and forgotten part of the story. That bridge was Bryan Hextall Junior. He was the son who carried the immense weight of his father's legacy and the father who paved the way for his own son's glory. On the ice, he was a blue-collar warrior, celebrated for his toughness. But behind that toughness was a private war no one could see. This is the story of the forgotten heart of a dynasty and of the devastating price one man paid to connect two generations of legends. What is the true cost of carrying a legendary name, and how much of a man can be sacrificed before there is nothing left? To understand the world that Bryan Hextall Jr. was born into, you have to go back to the golden, gritty era of his father. The original 6 NHL was a small, insular, and incredibly tough league. The players were not the highly paid, finely tuned athletes of today. They were working-class men who travelled by train, who played a brutal schedule with a level of physicality that would be shocking to modern eyes. Bryan Sr. was the epitome of this era, a hard-nosed star for the New York Rangers, a hero from the Canadian prairies who had conquered the biggest city in the world. Bryan Jr. was born in 1941, right in the middle of his father's Hall of Fame career. He and his brothers, Dennis and Randy, grew up not just as kids, but as the sons of a legend. Their childhood was a world of locker rooms, the smell of liniment and stale beer, long train rides, and the constant background roar of an arena crowd. Hockey was not just a game in their household, it was the family business, the source of their identity. The pressure to live up to the Hextall name was immense, an unspoken expectation that hung in the air like the cold breath of a winter morning. Every time a young Bryan stepped on the ice, he wasn't just another kid, he was a Hextall, and that meant he had to be tougher, stronger, and better than everyone else. But the world of hockey that Bryan Jr. would enter was a world on the cusp of a dramatic transformation. In 1967, the original 6 era, which had defined the sport for a quarter of a century, came to a stunning end. The NHL, in a single, ambitious stroke, doubled in size overnight, expanding from 6 to 12 teams. This was the Great Expansion, an event that was the big bang of modern hockey. It created a massive influx of new jobs and new opportunities for players who, just a year earlier, would have had no shot at the big leagues. New cities like Pittsburgh, Philadelphia, and St. Louis, cities with no NHL history, were suddenly major league hockey towns, new frontiers hungry for heroes. It was into this new, wide-open landscape, a world of both immense opportunity and chaotic uncertainty, that Bryan Hextall Jr., carrying the full weight of his famous name, would finally get his chance to step onto the ice. From his earliest days in Poplar Point, Manitoba, Bryan Jr. seemed destined to follow in his father's skate tracks. He was a natural talent, a powerful skater with a hard shot, and the same gritty, determined playing style that had made his father a star. He rose through the ranks of junior hockey, a star in his own right with the Brandon Wheat Kings, always playing with the heavy burden of that famous name on the back of his jersey. But unlike some sons of famous athletes, his path to the NHL was not a straight, easy line. He was not a high first-round draft pick who was handed a roster spot. He had to earn his way, spending several long, frustrating seasons in the tough, unforgiving world of the minor leagues. This is a crucial, often overlooked, part of his story. He wasn't just a legacy. He was a grinder. He spent years riding buses through winter storms, playing in small, cold arenas in cities like Vancouver, St. Paul, and Buffalo. This was the reality of the minor pro leagues in the 1960s, a world of low pay, constant travel, and the ever-present fear that your dream could end with a single bad game or a single injury. It was in the minor leagues that he forged his own identity. He proved to himself and to the hockey world that he wasn't just Bryan Hextall's son. He was a force to be reckoned with. His big break arrived during the NHL's major expansion in 1967, when the league doubled in size from 6 to 12 teams, introducing new franchises like the Pittsburgh Penguins, Philadelphia Flyers, and Los Angeles Kings to capitalize on growing interest in hockey across North America. He started with a brief initial stint on his father's former team, the New York Rangers, where he appeared in just 3 games during the 1967-68 season, struggling to secure a regular spot amid a roster of established veterans. However, it was with one of the new expansion teams, the Pittsburgh Penguins, that he truly found his professional home and identity. In February 1969, he was traded to the Penguins in a multiplayer deal that also involved future Hall of Famer Gene Pronovost, joining a young, inexperienced squad in a challenging, blue-collar steel town known for its industrial heritage and resilient working-class ethos. Pittsburgh, with its emphasis on hard work, perseverance, and a straightforward, no-nonsense attitude forged in the mills and factories, quickly embraced Bryan Hextall Junior, seeing in him a reflection of their own community values. He embodied the ideal player for that city, mirroring its gritty, unyielding character through his on-ice demeanor and contributions. Rather than being a flashy, high-scoring superstar who dazzled with individual brilliance, he excelled as a grinder, a dedicated blue-collar warrior who prioritized team success over personal accolades. As a tough, two-way forward, he brought relentless, ferocious energy to every shift, excelling in physical play that wore down opponents. He crashed the net for gritty, hard-earned goals amid scrums in front of the crease, battled tirelessly in the corners to regain possession through forechecking and board work, and thrived on the penalty kill by blocking shots, disrupting plays, and clearing the zone under pressure. These were the little, often thankless tasks that built winning habits and sustained momentum in games. In those formative years, he became the heart and soul of the early Penguins teams, a franchise grappling with financial instability, low attendance, and on-ice struggles just to remain viable in the league's competitive landscape. His peak performance occurred in the 1970-71 season, when he tallied 21 goals and 30 assists for 51 points in 76 games, emerging as a consistent force night after night with his all-around play that balanced offense, defense, and physicality. This excellence earned him selection to the NHL All-Star team, a rare honor for a player on a struggling expansion club that finished last in the West Division with only 60 points. Being named an All-Star highlighted the respect he commanded league-wide, validating his skills against the era's elite. At the 1971 All-Star game held at Boston Garden, he shared the ice with legends such as Bobby Orr, known for his revolutionary defensive play, Phil Esposito, the prolific scorer, and Gordie Howe, the enduring icon of longevity and toughness. For that singular evening, he transcended his lineage as the son of Hall of Famer Bryan Hextall Sr., standing as an equal among peers based on his own merits. For several incredible seasons in the early 1970s, he reigned as Mr. Penguin, a cherished figure who had finally escaped his father's long shadow through sheer determination and grit. To the city of Pittsburgh, a tough, blue-collar steel town, Bryan Hextall Jr. was more than just a hockey player. He was one of them. He was the embodiment of their work ethic, gritty, relentless, and utterly without pretense. When he scored, it was rarely a thing of beauty, but a testament to sheer will, a puck forced over the line through a chaotic scrum of bodies and sticks. The fans at the Civic Arena didn't just cheer for him, they identified with him. His sweat was their sweat. His effort was their effort. He had forged his own niche in the hockey world, proving to skeptics, teammates, and most importantly, himself, that he belonged at the professional level entirely on his own terms. He was not just a Hextall, he was their Hextall. But in the cold, transactional world of professional sports, such bonds are fragile. As his prime years concluded, his career entered a new, unsettling phase. The title of Mr. Penguin was stripped away by the harsh reality of a telephone call and a business decision. He became a valuable veteran journeyman, a respected piece of hockey currency to be traded and utilized. First, he was sent to the Atlanta Flames, 1974-75, a fledgling franchise in the non-traditional Sun Belt market. Suddenly, the roaring, knowledgeable crowds of Pittsburgh were replaced by a more tepid atmosphere, a city still learning the nuances of the game. He was no longer a foundational hero, but a new guy, a veteran brought in to provide stability. From there, it was a brief stop with the Detroit Red Wings, 1975-76, a move to one of the league's hallowed original 6 cities, but to a team then mired in a long, painful decline, earning the grim moniker of the Dead Wings. His NHL journey concluded after the 1975-76 season with the Detroit Red Wings. Although he was subsequently claimed by the Minnesota North Stars, his time playing in the top league had come to an end. In each city, he brought the same relentless work ethic and quiet, professional leadership. He never complained. He did his job. But the life of a journeyman is one of perpetual dislocation. It's a life of packing boxes, of uprooting a family, of sons starting over in new schools, and wives trying to build a new life in a strange city, all with the knowledge that it could happen all over again next season. The locker room, once a sanctuary of stability in Pittsburgh, became a revolving door of new faces, new systems, and new coaches. This constant state of flux chipped away at his sense of belonging. The only constant, the one reliable thread that connected the locker rooms in Atlanta, Detroit, and Minnesota was the culture. And it was this period that exposed him more deeply to the pervasive and often destructive off-ice culture of the 1970s NHL. It was an era of boys will be boys, a testosterone-fueled bubble where intense on-ice camaraderie and violence frequently spilled over into heavy, ritualistic drinking. The league was a travelling circus of young, well-paid men, their bodies battered and their adrenaline constantly spiking. Alcohol was not just a part of the culture, it was the culture's lifeblood. It was the universal solvent for the brutal physical toll of the game and the unspoken emotional pressures of professional athletic life. It was how teams bonded on long, lonely road trips, crammed into charter planes and faceless hotel bars in a dozen different cities. It was how they celebrated euphoric victories, the champagne and beer flowing freely, washing away the memory of the pain it took to win. And, most dangerously, it was how they numbed the sting of humiliating defeats. For a player struggling with a growing dependency, this culture was both a sanctuary and a trap. It allowed him to hide in plain sight. The very structure of the life provided a perfect camouflage for the disease. A man having a few too many after a game wasn't seen as a cry for help. He was just one of the boys, blowing off steam. A player showing up to practice looking rough wasn't questioned about his habits. It was assumed he'd just been in a fight the night before. The unspoken code of toughness, the hyper-masculine ethos that defined the sport, created a powerful conspiracy of silence. Vulnerability was the ultimate sin. You could talk about a separated shoulder or a broken jaw, but you never, ever talked about a troubled mind or a heavy heart. Teammates would clink glasses in dimly lit bars from Montreal to Los Angeles, sharing war stories of brutal hits and narrow victories, and the line between celebration and self-medication simply disappeared. For a man like Bryan Hextall Junior, this setting was a perfect storm. He had spent his entire life living up to a tough guy image, a persona forged in the immense shadow of his father's legendary career with the New York Rangers, where Bryan Hextall Senior had been a Hall of Fame scoring machine and a Stanley Cup champion. That dynastic name was a constant, unspoken pressure that weighed on every shift, every fight, every goal he scored or failed to score. He was never just Bryan. He was always Hextall's boy. The drinking, which may have started as a social activity, a way to fit in and bond with teammates, slowly and insidiously became a crutch. What began as a few beers to unwind after a grueling match evolved into a nightly habit that dulled the sharp edges of anxiety and physical pain. The life of a grinder was a landscape of constant agony. The deep bone bruises that never fully healed, the aching back, the stitched-up cuts. Alcohol was a readily available anesthetic. More than that, it was a balm for the psychological wounds. It was a way to quiet the voice in his head that told him he could never truly measure up to his father. The anxiety that gnawed at him in the quiet of a hotel room, the chronic pain that flared up in the middle of the night, the loneliness of being the perpetual new guy in town, all found a temporary blessed relief in the bottle. And perhaps there were quieter, inner demons at play. Personal insecurities, unresolved family dynamics, or the deep emotional toll of a life defined by physical aggression that he could not share with the world, bound as he was by the ironclad macho code of the sport. The tough, stoic exterior he presented on the ice, where he racked up penalty minutes and fought tooth and nail for his team, became an increasingly heavy mask that he wore off it. This facade, so crucial for his survival in the rink, hid a growing turmoil within, a storm of dependency that was eroding his confidence and his health, one drink at a time, unnoticed by those who saw only the enforcer, the grinder, the reliable veteran, the proud Hextall son. The culture didn't create his problem, but it nurtured it, protected it, and made it almost impossible to escape. In 1976, after 10 hard-fought seasons in the NHL, Bryan Hextall Junior retired from professional hockey. His career stats, over 500 games played, points accumulated through grit rather than finesse, marked the end of an era for him. For any professional athlete, retirement is a difficult, often terrifying transition. It is a kind of death where the adrenaline-fueled highs of competition give way to mundane realities. The roar of the crowd, the cheers echoing through packed stadiums like Madison Square Garden or the Civic Arena, is replaced by silence, broken only by the hum of everyday life. The rigid, demanding structure of the season, the early morning practices, the high-stakes games, the endless road trips crisscrossing North America, is replaced by an empty schedule, days stretching out without purpose or direction. The identity that has defined your entire life, the very thing that made you special in the eyes of millions, is suddenly gone, leaving a void that many athletes struggle to fill. For Bryan, this transition was particularly brutal. He had lived his entire life in the world of hockey, starting from childhood skates on frozen ponds, through junior leagues, and into the pros. It was not just his job, it was his family's legacy, with his father also a hockey pioneer and his brothers following in the footsteps. And now, in his mid-30s, he was on the outside looking in, no longer part of the fraternity that had shaped him. The problem that had been a quiet whisper during his playing days, the alcoholism that he had managed to keep largely under control amidst the structure of the season, the travel, and the accountability to teammates, now had room to grow unchecked. In the silence of his post-hockey life, without the structure of the game to keep it in check, his alcoholism began to spiral out of control. He tried to stay in the game he loved, leveraging his experience to contribute in new ways. He worked for a time as a scout for NHL teams, his sharp hockey mind still very much intact, able to spot talent in young prospects with the same keen eye that had served him on the ice. but his battle with alcoholism made it impossible to hold down a job. The unreliability brought on by hangovers, missed meetings, and erratic behavior eroded trust and opportunities. His life became a heartbreaking cycle of attempts at recovery, entering rehab programs, attending support meetings, vowing to turn things around, followed by the crushing despair of relapse, each failure compounding the shame and hopelessness. This was not a story of a wild, out-of-control rock star, a tale of public meltdowns and tabloid headlines splashed across newspapers. This was a quiet, domestic tragedy, a slow, painful disintegration that was happening behind closed doors, in the privacy of his home, affecting his family in ways that outsiders could never see. Hidden from the public eye that had once celebrated him as a scrapper and a contributor to the sport's golden era, Bryan's decline was marked by personal losses, strained relationships, and a fading sense of self, all unfolding in the shadows of his former glory. His family, his wife, and his 3 young sons, including a boy named Ron, who was now a budding hockey star in his own right, watched, heartbroken and often helpless, as the strong, determined man they loved began to fade away. The man who had been a hero to an entire city was now fighting a lonely, desperate battle against a disease he could not control. He was a man known for his incredible on-ice toughness, but he was losing the most important fight of his life. The central, heartbreaking question of Bryan Hextall Junior's story is a debate not about a single event, but about a culture, a disease, and the crushing weight of silence. There were no villains in his story, only victims. The controversy, if you can call it that, lies in the silence that surrounded his struggle. How much did the hyper-masculine, suck-it-up culture of 1970s hockey contribute to his downfall? In a world where admitting to a struggle with alcohol or mental health was seen as a profound sign of weakness, a betrayal of the warrior code, did he feel that he had nowhere to turn? Did the very identity he had built his life on, the tough, reliable Hextall, become a prison that prevented him from asking for help? These are questions that are impossible to answer definitively, but they lie at the sad heart of his story. And then there is the question of the name. What was the true weight of being a Hextall? Did the constant, unspoken pressure to live up to his Hall of Fame father create a burden that became too heavy to bear? Did he feel that, despite his own considerable success, despite being an NHL All-Star, he could never truly measure up? This is a profound and deeply human theme, the story of a son trying to find his own place in the world, in the long shadow of a great father. His struggle was a private one, but it speaks to a universal human experience. The end came on July 25th, 1984, a date that marked the abrupt and sorrowful close to Bryan Hextall Junior's tumultuous journey. At just 43 years old, he succumbed to a brain aneurysm, a sudden rupture in a blood vessel in the brain that caused catastrophic internal bleeding. Medical experts often link such conditions to chronic health issues, and in Bryan's case, it was likely exacerbated by his long battle with alcoholism, which had ravaged his body over the years. The excessive drinking had weakened his cardiovascular system, increased blood pressure, and contributed to overall physiological stress, creating a perfect storm for such a fatal event. What might have been a preventable tragedy was instead the culmination of years of unchecked dependency, where the alcohol that once numbed his pains now accelerated his decline. He passed away quietly, perhaps in the solitude of his home or a hospital room, far removed from the arenas where he had once thrived. It was a tragic, quiet end to a life that had been lived so loudly on the ice, filled with the thunderous checks, the cheers of crowds, and the raw intensity of NHL battles. No longer the enforcer charging across the rink, Bryan left behind a legacy shadowed by personal demons, a stark reminder of the hidden costs of athletic glory. His death shocked those who knew him, evoking reflections on the fragility beneath the tough exterior he had maintained for so long, and highlighting how the pressures of a dynastic hockey name had ultimately taken their toll in ways no one could foresee. The most profound and lasting consequence of Bryan Hextall Junior's life and death is found in the story of his son. Ron Hextall had watched his father's agonizing decline. He had seen, firsthand, the devastating toll that alcoholism could take on a man and his family. And that experience forged in him a ferocious, almost terrifying level of determination. Ron went on to become one of the most iconic and controversial goaltenders in NHL history. He played with a fiery, almost uncontrollable rage. He was famous for smashing his stick in frustration, for getting into fights with opposing players, for a competitive intensity that bordered on the psychotic. But he was also brilliantly talented, a winner of the Vezina Trophy as the league's best goaltender and the Conn Smythe Trophy as the MVP of the playoffs. It's not a stretch to see Ron's on-ice persona as, in part, a reaction to the trauma of his father's life. It was as if he was channeling all the pain, all the anger, all the frustration of his family's tragedy and unleashing it on the ice. His incredible success was a way of honouring and perhaps finally confronting the painful Hextall legacy. He took the toughness of his father and grandfather and amplified it, turning it into both a shield and a weapon. He would not be a victim. He would be a conqueror. And in 1987, as a member of the Philadelphia Flyers, the same team his uncle Dennis had starred for, he led them to the Stanley Cup Finals as a rookie. He became the third generation of the Hextall dynasty, a testament to the family's incredible resilience. Bryan Jr.'s story is also a significant, if tragic, chapter in the slow evolution of how professional sports deals with mental health and addiction. His death, and the similar, quiet tragedies of other players from his era, were the painful precursors to a modern era where these issues are, thankfully, beginning to be discussed with more openness and compassion. He was a casualty of a culture of silence, a culture that has, in the decades since his death, slowly and painstakingly begun to change. He is the forgotten link in one of hockey's greatest dynasties. He is a tragic story of a good man who was overcome by a terrible disease. But he is also much more than that. He was a blue-collar hero, a player who, for a time, was the heart and soul of a new franchise and a proud city. He was a man who carried an immense burden, the burden of a legendary name, and he did so with a quiet grace for as long as he possibly could. His story is a cautionary tale about the invisible pressures that can crush even the strongest among us. It's a reminder that the toughness we celebrate on the ice is no match for the battles that are fought in the silence of the mind. Bryan Hextall Jr.'s life was not one of failure. It was the story of a man who fought a disease that was stronger than him. While his toughness on the ice was legendary, his greatest and most tragic battle was the one he fought alone. His legacy is found not just in his own respectable career, but in the incredible, fiery triumph of his son, and in the quiet, enduring strength of a family that refused to be broken.